So Baktash is an educator, communicator, a person who I love dearly, and welcome.
Thank you, sir.
So Baktash, you got your mic on.
Yep.
If you would, share with us a bit about your work and why you do it, and
Sure.
where it comes from. And,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Terry. It's a delight to be here. Everybody, welcome. It's such a pleasure to see all of your faces. It's always a delight to have people ask me to come speak. It's such an interesting thing. And maybe it'll be useful to share that when I was a kid, I was deeply shy. I was deeply shy. In fact, I was so shy that I used to hide behind my mother in the midst of people. And that didn't go away for a very long time. That didn't go away until I was about 11 years old. I didn't speak at all. Okay? And why is this an interesting thing? Well, now I go around the United States and I get asked to speak to many people. And so what's also really beautiful about the world is the ability to surprise yourself. When I was a kid, my family, we're from Afghanistan. My father's from Kandahar, my mother's from Kabul. And my father fell in love with America because he was taught by a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1960s. That volunteer's name was Eric. Just around the time that Tony and Terry served in Afghanistan. And so my father fell in love with the idea of America before he even came here. So then my father went to Kabul and got a job with USAID on their first demographic study of the country, which is still being used today at the State Department. Funny enough. It's really hard to do surveys in Afghanistan. Okay? So, my father decided he had to leave Afghanistan one day because my father was outspoken against the Soviet-backed Afghan government in the early 80s. And so my father knew that he was going to, quote-unquote, disappear. So he told my mother, pack your bags, we have to leave tomorrow. And that's how things work with Afghans. There's no planning. It just happens. Some of you may have experienced this with families that you deal with. Things just happen. So my mother prepared me and my younger brother, got into a taxi like my father asked, and she met him outside of Kabul. My father had ties with the Mujahideen, and they got on horseback 7 days and 6 nights and rode through the Hindu Kush to eventually get to Peshawar. This was the first time that my mother not only left Kabul, but left her neighborhood. Left her neighborhood. And so my parents and my brother and I were in Peshawar in the refugee camps there for a little bit. Eventually, they had the wherewithal to move to Islamabad. And there, my parents were trying to figure out what to do with their lives. The war was going on in Afghanistan, and they didn't know what to do. So my father went to the consular office at the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad with the English that he had learned from Americans in Kandahar and Kabul, asked what the process was like to get an asylum, to come to America. And so my father had a letter of recommendation from Dr. Kerr, who ran the demographic study at USAID, who both Tony and Terry know. Small world. My father showed this letter to the consular officer. And what's really interesting is that it's a small world. In fact, it's a very small Afghan world. This consular officer knew Dr. Kerr, called him and said, "Hey, is this gentleman telling the truth?" And Dr. Kerr said, "Yes, he is." So we got a visa to come to America through a church that sponsored my family. And that church was St. Paul's Lutheran Church that's in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And that's where we were brought, and that's where my parents still are. Let me tell you a funny story about Carlisle, because it may even happen here in Fort Wayne. So I said that my father's from Kandahar. And in Kandahar, it's a relatively conservative part of Afghanistan. And my father knew a little bit of English. And we were riding around. This is my father's story now. We were riding around with one of our sponsors named George Marovich. And my father said, George, I have a question for you. Sure, Basir, what would you like to know? My dad said, who are these people riding around on these buggies? Who are these people? And George said, oh, you mean these people with the horses and the buggies? My dad said, yeah, who are these people? Tell me about these people. And what's interesting is George said, these people are known as the Amish. They're part of America. They're Americans. And my dad could not believe it. My father could not believe it. Why? Because my father came from Kandahar, where people wear black clothes and have big black beards. In fact, my father thought God was playing a sick joke on him. How is this possible? So we were raised in central Pennsylvania, before there were other Afghans and other Muslims, and even before basmati rice arrived to central Pennsylvania. We were there. And so a lot of the work that I do comes from trying to find a sense of home and belonging, trying to find connections with people that are perceived not to have anything in common with us. This was the environment that I was raised in. And I started telling you that when I was a kid, I was very shy. And I was very shy because when I was a young boy, I was seen as the other. I was bullied and beat up all the time. And that stayed for a very long time. In fact, it's a catalyst for a lot of the work that I do. My parents thought they did us a very good service to take us out of conflict. And they thought that we were going to be okay in America. And they were right to a degree. What they didn't anticipate is us being harassed in those ways. Right? They didn't anticipate any of that. They thought that since they took us out of the war, that we were going to be okay in America, that we were going to be okay in the schools and communities of America. And we became okay eventually. At first, it was very difficult. And I share this with you because maybe this is what some of you are dealing with your Afghan families. How do I deal with these children? How do I deal with these parents? What's going on? How do I have better conversations with them? Okay? So I share this with you because it'll give us context for our conversations for the rest of the evening. Is that helpful?
That's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And as we go into just a bit more of Baktash's background, he's put together his own company called Talim, which again means education, curiosity, desire to learn. So Talim is a project of Baktash's that includes many projects. So he's writing his memoirs. He's had a podcast of more than 70 interviews with stories of transformation. You can find it on his website, baktashahadi.org, and listen to his podcast. It's awesome. 70 people who have been transformed in their life as refugees in various nationalities, various countries, various circumstances. But Talim is focused on telling stories that matter. And as Baktash describes it on his website, what does that mean? And he says, how do we want to be in relationship with each other? It's a question he's asking. And so Baktash, I'd ask you to share why that question.
Yeah.
What is it you're driving at there in your production work and in what we want to do?
Yeah. It's a lovely question. Thank you. So I'm very interested in the relationship between things, right? And I would ask all of you, if you had to answer this question, what would you say is the most important relationship in your life? It's a very important question. And if I asked you that question specifically, what would you say? Is it the one with your children? Is it the one with your parents? Is it the one with your faith? Is it the one with your dog? What is the most important relationship in your life? And I'll give you an answer that maybe you haven't thought about before. I would argue it's actually with yourself. It's actually with yourself. And so, I think the purpose of human life in many ways is to become better, to become a better version of ourselves. And I think that's what it means to self-actualize, is to be in the pursuit of that. And so once we're on that path, I think, then we can ask the question, if this is on the path that I'm on, in terms of my relationship with myself, what does that mean for my other relationships? How will that dictate how I'll be with my friends, with my mother, with my father, with my son, my daughter, my friends, and those that I may not even know? Because if I may say, everything that we do in our lives is actually for us. That's not being selfish. That's being intentional. I came here because I have good friends, but I came here so I could be better, so I could learn about all of you, so I could see a slice of America that I haven't seen before. And as I'm in the pursuit of this, I hope to elevate others along the way by asking the right questions, by being curious to learn about you, but also to expand my wherewithal about the world. What don't I know? What sort of imagination can I step into that I wasn't aware of before? You see how it's actually serving me as I'm serving you? So in that way, everything is a relationship, right? When you feed your child, you want them to grow, but you're also doing it because you want to be a good parent for you, so you have a good relationship with yourself, so you can see yourself as a good mother, so you can see yourself as a good father. Because if you don't like yourself, then you're in a bad place. Then you're in a bad place. You'll hurt others and you'll hurt yourself. And that is the last thing that we want. And so, if you are whole, if you've thought about your life, and you've thought about the things that matter to you, then you're in a place to elevate others. And that's what I truly believe. And so that's why I do what I do. Is that helpful?
Help me. I'll just quickly ask the next two questions that you ask of yourself, really, on the website.
Sure.
In describing his work with Talim, it was, what do we want to do to be for each other and for ourselves? So after asking that first question of who's important and what do I want to be, what about the for each other part of that?
Yeah.
And then finally, what is required of me to be a good neighbor? And that's a third question. So, and all of this under the heading of curiosity.
Absolutely.
And learning and education. So
once we start to think about who we are and the ways that we want to be better, so if you think about the type of person that you want to be, and that's up here, and then you think about where you are, all of a sudden there's a distance. That means we all have work to do, don't we? Even at this age of us being a little more mature, right? Because what I would argue at this mature age that a lot of people in this room are in, or at, there's a lot of work that you probably haven't done for a very long time. Conversations that you may not have had all these years. Things that you've been running away from for a very long time. Well, you know what's wonderful about being in this place? You still have the opportunity to become the type of person that you want to be. I'm still not there. My sense is most of us aren't. But the fact that you're on the pursuit of that is what matters most. That's what matters most. Right? Even if we say this to our children, don't we? Sweetheart, it's not important that you win the game. What's important is that you try. Don't we say that to our kids? It's not important that you get the top grade in the class. It's that you actually applied yourself. And what's beautiful is we can actually turn that back onto ourselves. And the most difficult work in our lives is actually to look in the mirror and to say, how am I still disappointing myself to this day? And how will I overcome that? And so once we start to do that type of work, then we can say, what will I be for you then? How will I be in service to you in this relationship? Whether it's your wife, your husband, your child, your brother, or your sister that you haven't spoken to in many years. Because she didn't come to your wedding because she didn't like your ex-husband. This happens. This is life. So what will we do in these moments? And that's what it means to ask the question, what will we be for each other? How will we be in service of others as we're in service to each other. Right? So Terry spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. And if I asked him what is one of the things that he loves about Afghanistan, my sense is he'll probably say the hospitality of the people there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what I would say is, what does it mean to be a good host? To a relationship, to yourself, and to others. Because if you can answer that question, then you're in a place to actually elevate yourself and others around you. What does it mean to be a good host? I would argue it's about being in service to others, asking questions that are open-ended, that aren't about being judgmental, and actually listening to the response. Silence, too, is a response. And so, being aware of these things is something that we can all improve on, to include me. And so, the last question was about what does that require of us now? Right? So all of us here are in Fort Wayne. What a beautiful little slice of America. And some of you have probably been here for a very long time. Maybe generationally you've been here. God bless you, what an amazing thing. And then some of you are brand new here. Welcome. Khosh Ramadan. And so, what's interesting is we have all these people here now. The question that I ask of all of you is, what will you do with this opportunity? How will you be a host? And how will you be a new American? These are the questions that we should be asking of ourselves. And when we ask that type of question, then all of a sudden, you'd be surprised how you will come together. Right? Instead of saying, what was it like to be there and why are you here? Of all the places, why are you here? That seems like a more of a judgmental question for me. Maybe a more open-ended question is, how do you like to be in Fort Wayne now? What is it like for you to be in Fort Wayne? Do you have other family that live in other parts of America? How is it different? And all of a sudden, you're in a conversation about learning versus judging. Right? Because we're not going anywhere. Are we? Great. We're not going anywhere. My parents are still in Pennsylvania. My parents are still in Carlisle. I live 2 hours away from Carlisle because of the way that community embraced us. Right? Let me give you an example of how the community of Carlisle tried to be friends with us, and I'll tell you the story. So, in the 1980s, there was not a Google or a Facebook or a computer in every home. Do you all remember the Encyclopedia Britannica? Do you remember that? The Encyclopedia Britannica? Yep. Exactly. So if you wanted to learn about something, you would have to go to the library, you'd have to go in, you have to find the Encyclopedia Britannica, and you have to look up the thing that you want to look up. And if you looked up the section on Afghanistan, it was one paragraph. And that paragraph was about the Mujahideen and how they're fighting America's war in Afghanistan. Right? There was nothing about culture. There was nothing about history. There was nothing. So, these 9 families that sponsored my family at St. Paul's Lutheran Church wanted to host my family, and so they took turns. They took turns, right, hosting us. One family was responsible for helping my mother learn how to drive. One family was responsible for helping my dad pay taxes. My dad didn't know what taxes were. One family was responsible for helping my parents learn English, right? All these things. And then, so these families would also invite us over for dinner. For dinner. And so the one family that invited us first were known as the Millers, John and Emily Miller. They invited my family over. So we went, and they made some lasagna for us. Lasagna. And you know, my parents were looking at it. My father tried it. My mother smelled it. And my father just pushed it around his plate. And my father's very polite, and he would smile. You know, John and Emily were asking, how is it? He would say, it's very good. But they didn't notice that he wasn't putting it in his mouth. And then my mother would say to my father, which means, please tell them that I'm sick. It's that time of the month. Right? And so the John and Emily would say, why isn't she eating? Oh, she's sick. And they would, oh, okay, fine. So my mother would pretend like she was busy with us, the kids, and we weren't touching it. The next week, we went over to the Maroviches, and they made us lasagna. Same thing happened. My father's pushing it around. My mother, I'm telling him I'm sick. The whole thing. Week after week after week, 7 weeks in a row, we were given lasagna. And later on, my father gained the courage and the English language to eventually ask George Marovich and Emily Thumma and all these folks, you know, I have to ask you, why is it that you all made lasagna for us? Why did you do that? Of all the foods in America, that food. And you know what they said? They said, Basir, you all look Sicilian. You all look Italian. So we made you lasagna. And you told us you liked it. So we continued to make it for you. And so in the Encyclopedia Britannica, there was no information about the cuisine of Afghanistan. Right? We actually didn't eat cheese for a very long time. It's not what you do in Afghanistan. Right? We push it away, and they weren't paying attention. They weren't watching us. They were listening to my father, but my father's polite. But they weren't watching us. You see? Their intention was positive, but they missed the mark. They should have had a conversation. Basir, Marzia, what is food like in Afghanistan? What is it that you eat there on a daily basis? How do you make it? What is it called? Simple yet basic questions. And can I tell you what most refugees miss when they come to America? They miss their families, they miss their community, but the thing that we miss most is our food. And you all know this feeling. If anybody's ever spent some time abroad, if you spent some time in Thailand, or Ecuador, or Peru, or Ukraine, what do you miss most? Pizza, spaghetti, potatoes, cheese. These things that resemble a feeling of warmth in your home. Right? The little things. And so you all know this, but it's a wonderful reminder to say, let's have a conversation about what these people actually want versus what they're telling me they want. Because they want to make me happy. Okay? So I'm going to pause there to see where Terry wants to go next.
Okay. I've asked Baktash to share some of his work is in the form of video documentary work.
Sure.
And Baktash will introduce each of two short trailers, sure. two-minute trailers from a couple of his projects. Yep. And then we'll take a break and we can try some of the Afghan naan and rot and get a cup of tea with it.
Yep.
Tea's the best thing to go with rot, okay? And some nuts and fruit. All of those things are typically set out for guests in an Afghan home. And but enjoy those when we take a break. But sure. Baktash, of your film projects, sure. we talked about you sharing a couple of them. Sure. And one of your earliest projects was Frame by Frame, yep. that you were involved in translating, and it came to you late or early in your film work. So if you describe that.
Sure. So thank you for that, Terry. I didn't study film in school. I didn't study storytelling in school. I studied sociology and anthropology. Why? 1 week after I went to college, 9/11 happened, and the world changed. And so I became very obsessed at that point with the power of belief. The power of belief because the Al-Qaeda terrorists that attacked America believed in a certain thing. Okay? So I became obsessed with belief and the power of belief. So when I finished college, I did something that I knew would serve, I think, others in an interesting way. I joined the Peace Corps because my family was inspired to come to America through the service of the Peace Corps. So I got to live in Mozambique to be an English teacher for 2.5 years. What a fascinating country. And when people ask me what that experience was like, as I tell them it was the best education of my life. Why? I didn't have running water, so I had to fetch my water every single day. So now when I turn on the faucet and wash my face, I think to myself, thank God I don't have to fetch water today, to this day. I also didn't have electricity. So I'm blessed when I find a charger, even at Terry's house, which is where I'm staying. And then lastly, I got malaria 2 times. So it taught me how fragile our health is and how the community there helped me before anybody else. Right? So lessons of life is what Mozambique taught me. So then afterwards, I went and I served in Afghanistan as a combat interpreter for 3 years with the Marines. And I learned what war brings out in us. Okay? And so after that experience, I came back to America, and through the networks of Washington, D.C., which is where I live, a friend said, hey, listen, 2 filmmakers reached out to me, and they want a film translated. I can't do it. Are you interested? And I said, sure, let's see what they got. These filmmakers then emailed me footage that they had, and I was captivated. Their names were Mo Scarpelli and Alexandria Bombach. And I said, listen, I'd be delighted to translate your film. And they said, how much do you cost? And I said, I'll do this for really cheap. I told them $2,000. Man, I made a mistake. I'm teasing. It was some of the best work of my life. So they brought me out to Portland, Oregon. We spent the next 2 months translating this film. And I learned the process of editing and filmmaking and the power of footage, music, and language all combined. And when we went live and premiered with our film at South by Southwest in 2015, I learned the power of story then. Because I traveled across the United States with that film, and instead of watching the film in theaters, I would go into the theater and watch the audience's reaction to the film. And I would see people transformed in the course of an hour and a half and their perspective towards Afghans, a country that they'd never even been to before. And that's where I found myself deeply transformed by the power of story and filmmaking in particular. And so I think maybe now what we could do is watch a little trailer to give you an idea of what that film is about. Really quickly, it's about 4 photojournalists that put their lives at risk to capture the truth in Afghanistan, I think in 2011 and 12, which is when I was there. So maybe, Nakia, could you please play that clip? Yep. Good.
Journalism and this free situation for media is really new in Afghanistan. I think when the troops leave, we will have a lot of problems. We won't have this, freedom of speech that we have now. This is a big possibility that the world, forget us again. That will be the future of the journalism in Afghanistan.
This 10 years been different situation for us. Now things are changing in Afghanistan. This is the main time for Afghan photographers to really stand up and to still keep Afghanistan on the news and not let it forget.
We didn't have this before. These 10 years was a revolution for photography in Afghanistan, that everybody in Afghanistan tried to record the history and the moment themselves, trying to be voice for those people who cannot shout.
I think it is the responsibility of all photographers and journalists in Afghanistan to not let whatever happened during the Taliban or civil war to happen again.
Taliban will come back somehow. And I feel that I will be one of those people who, be faced with the revenge of this, extremists.
It may be difficult, but I will find ways. I will always stand for what I believe.
The world now is like one body. So all the members of this body should know that one member has a pain, and they should feel this, and they should know, and they should find out.
So Baktash, reflecting on this particular project, where did that take you, and what came next in your path of learning?
Yeah.
Talim.
Yeah, so that film really opened my eyes in terms of the power of storytelling. So I was a translator, associate producer, and film ambassador with Frame by Frame. And it made me really curious about being involved in the art of storytelling and the power of communication. And so it led me to a couple of other films related to Afghanistan. There's one called Afghanistan by Choice, which is acquired by the New York Times. There's another film called Muslims in Trump's America, which I was a participant in and subject in, which won a Peabody. And then my most recent film is called Retrograde, where I'm the executive producer. And there are a number of amazing filmmakers that came together to make this film. In fact, those that work in storytelling and filmmaking, it always takes a tribe to make a film. It's not one person. So this film, Retrograde, is about the United States' last 9 months in Afghanistan. So I got involved in the film when Biden announced the withdrawal of U.S. troops in Afghanistan in May of 2021. Because prior to that, National Geographic, who commissioned this film, wanted to make a film about the U.S. Green Berets and what war meant to these families, to these soldiers. And then once Biden announced the withdrawal, the scope changed from a film about the Green Berets to a film about the Afghan military. And so that's when the National Geographic team and Matt Heineman and his team reached out to me to say, listen, we'd love for you to come on board and help us better understand this film, actually. And so what we didn't anticipate as we were working on Sami Sadat and others that were part of this film, the subjects of this film, is the eventual collapse of Kabul and the entire country. And what was astonishing was, as we were trying to get our cameramen into Kabul during that horrendous time when people were scared for their lives and trying to get on planes to leave, National Geographic was asking me to help get these cameramen in when I was fighting to get my family out. It's an astonishing place for many people to be at that time. And many people in this room are probably trying to get people out that they knew through any means possible. Private charter planes, military contacts, convoys, you name it. Because people were deathly scared that when the Taliban came into Kabul, that they were going to murder and kill anybody who was pro-America or had worked with Americans. So, that film is about the end of a chapter for America. But what I also want you all to think, I want to show the trailer, but what I want you to think about is, even though the war may be over for America as a country, the war is still going on for many people. And let me share how. For refugees that are here, now, new to America, they're fighting a war of survival every single day in their minds. How will I get through this life? How will I find my family? How will I be reunited with my parents, my brothers, and my sisters, or even my own children one day? The arts and there's something right now known as family reunification that's happening, where there's some family members in Mexico or Germany or even Fort Wayne, and they're trying to come together. Because through that chaos, people are trying to get on planes just to leave by any means necessary, to include infants. I'm sure you've seen photos of infants being given to U.S. soldiers. Take my child, get it far away from here. Can you imagine being in that place where you think that's a good idea? Where the opposite is, if I don't let my child go, it will die, she or he will die, I will die. And so, these people are dealing with war, actually every single day, in their minds. Who else is dealing with a lot of struggle? American veterans. We've been going on, the United States went into Afghanistan right after 9/11. It was there until the very end, until August of 2021. I want to ask you, how many veterans do you think served in Afghanistan over the course of 20 years? Somewhere up in the millions, maybe 1 million. There are 3 million enlisted people in the United States, enlisted service members. I would say 1 million members probably served in Afghanistan. 1 million. The question that I have to ask for all of them is, who did you lose in that war? What did you lose in that war? And how difficult is it for you to be back now, knowing that the thing that you were fighting against is back in power? Was all this done in vain? In addition to the PTSD that you may be dealing with, are you also dealing with moral injury? Another group that's dealing with a lot of PTSD and moral injury is Afghan veterans that served alongside American veterans in Afghanistan that are here. They too are suffering. The war continues for them. And so part of the work that I want to do with Retrograde is, I hope the film acts as a catalyst for a national conversation about what we will do with these people that gave so much to this war. Because if we don't, then I think the suicide rates for veterans will continue to go up. Right now it's about 20 a day. 20 veterans a day commit suicide. A day. And we're not having a national conversation about this. How many of you know somebody that served in Afghanistan? Probably a lot of you. Probably a lot of you. Okay? And so this war is actually more important than I think we can possibly begin to imagine. Even though it may not be on the news, it's still in the forefront of many people's minds. And so maybe what we could do is, Nakia, maybe we could show the trailer for Retrograde. If you'd like to watch it, it's streaming right now on Hulu and Disney+. For those that have watched it, God bless you and thank you. We're also screening it, I think, in Muncie tomorrow.
Yes, Baktash is going to Muncie and will be streaming Retrograde in its full length. If anybody wants to go to that, it'll be at 7 p.m. in Muncie at Ball State. And after this trailer, we'll take just a couple-minute break. Just keep it short, but go over and get some refreshment. This is a good Afghan thing to do. Get some tea, get some nuts, some fruit, some naan, and we'll come back and we'll talk more about Baktash's personal family experience and what it's meant to him and his family as refugees in the United States and now as people supporting Afghans who are arriving as refugees and are still living with the war that they've left behind. So if you would, Nakia, run the...
It's strange and confusing time right now. The Americans trained me, and after being committed for so many years, I just don't believe that the Americans are going to retrograde and leave the country. Our country is everything we have. And since the US left, I can see the sense of abandonment within the Afghan forces. I I want to live long enough to see peace in our country, spend time with my family, grow old in Afghanistan, and ultimately die in Afghanistan.
So it's coming to theaters November 11, but it's streaming now? Or?
It's already in theaters.
Okay.
And it's streaming now. And it's maybe share that the film was shortlisted for an Oscar. So the film's done really well in the world, and so we hope it continues the conversation about the realities for many people that have served in Afghanistan.
And with that, I think we need to call it time. And thank you all for coming.